Hey everyone, so today we're joined by Gigi Larue. She's the West Coast Intake Coordinator of OurDuty, an international support network for parents who wish to protect their children from gender ideology, and they advocate for children to be brought to adulthood with a healthy body and mind. So, Gigi, would you mind introducing yourself and tell us how you got involved with OurDuty?
It's actually Gigi Larue, and full disclosure, it's not my real name. I need to be
Mm-hmm.
incognito for the time being. I plan to be public sooner than later, but it affected me personally very profoundly about 4 years ago. And in the process of trying to find like minded people, I connected with OurDuty, which was started in England by a man named Keith Jordan. And we just started offering non-medical support services to parents and caregivers with kids who are suddenly trans-identified, and that's kind of the goal, is to get them interventions that are not permanent and life-altering.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you were personally involved. So how did you sort of get hear about OurDuty, and how did you sort of connect with them and bring about this mission?
Well, 4 years ago there wasn't much available online. There were a few places that had established themselves as being support systems, and OurDuty was one of them. And so, I reached out to him, and he said there was a lot of attention and interest from the United States, and would be willing to start a version here. And so there's one here, there's one in Canada, there's now one in Australia. And another few women and I share the United States. We cut it in half, so we take the West Coast and they take the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's just about connecting parents with the support that they need.
And so what is typically that support that they're looking for?
Well, this is a very lonely experience. If you're just getting into it, it's incredibly scary and alienating,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels very science fiction. And so I think just meeting other people that aren't going to tell you that your kid's sudden identity is really what they've been this whole time and you just didn't see it. It's helpful to give people outlets to talk about these things without having to be politically correct, because I think right now we're kind of in the grips of a cultural paradigm shift where speaking about certain things in public can have really massive consequences. And it's really hard
Mm-hmm.
on parents who are already struggling with their kids' identity crisis to be told by, their doctors, their teachers, their friends that they're the one who needs to adjust, as opposed to questioning why this is suddenly happening to their child. And so that's what our goal is to find therapists and connect parents with other parents, and just ask some questions, which again, I used to be kind of how things worked in this country, and it's becoming apparent that that's not really where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are just hearing about this for the first time, this sort of phenomenon of rapid onset gender dysphoria, how would you sort of explain this to them for those that are not aware yet?
Well, I mean, it's not a technical medical term, but it was based on a paper by Lisa Lippman. She hypothesized, after listening to anecdotal accounts from people in her community, a lot of them were girls, and a lot of them were coming out as trans in clusters. And so she hypothesized sort of a peer contagion component and a new version of something that has already been established as a disorder in the DSM-5, which is gender dysphoria. But this is different. This is happening at adolescence or earlier, and it's happening very quickly, and it's happening in groups. So there's other aspects that need to be addressed before we just treat it as typical gender dysphoria, which used to be something that was pretty exclusively older adults, and mostly male. So yeah, it's a phenomenon. There's a lot of components to it, but I think it attracts a lot of different types of kids. What we're seeing in the intake work that we do is that a lot of these kids are on the autism spectrum, and they have very black and white thinking. And that can mean that they
Mm-hmm.
will believe something they see on a Discord server or on a Tumblr page that says, like, if you feel like a girl, you might really be a girl. Or if you don't feel like a boy, you might be a girl, or just it just gives
Mm-hmm.
them gender messages that are very confusing. There's also a column of kids that are sexual trauma victims, where they've had a bad experience and they never want to have that again. So they try to sort of reduce and minimize what they look like in their sex, and that involves cutting off your hair, or just being someone else. It's an escape thing. Um, and then there's also Asian adopted kids are becoming a large cohort, and I think it's an identity piece as well. All of this is just a big identity crisis from what we can see. that's manifesting differently for different kids.
Right. So it sounds like it's an identity crisis, and it's sort of this coping mechanism for these kids that maybe you think they have, these underlying issues. You've seen, whether you you mentioned autism or all these different factors. And so how have you seen, or is there a typical story from a parent you'll hear, or is it sort of all over the place, or how have the stories from the parents reflected one another?
Well, I can tell you that almost any parent who's involved in this can read their story in someone else's story and see themselves. It's very cookie cutter in a very strange way. You have different. It tends to start happening around middle school, puberty. Kids get the idea from the class at school about gender or human sexuality. They sort of plant the seeds, and I don't think they're doing it out of malice, but it comes across as an opting out of puberty. And so you tell kids that they don't really have to go through this. They don't really have to grow up to become boys and girls. I think most kids at their most vulnerable in middle school, when all of this is hitting them like a ton of bricks, would take that. I mean, I would have taken that option. You can take this pill and get out of it, but it's just not quite that simple. It's a much more complex process, and it's much more devastating to our brains and bodies than what they see on the internet and on YouTube about how easy it is to just become someone else. It's an escape hatch. And I think the seeds are being planted at school, and then they're being watered and sown on the internet, where you see all these happy people who've made this decision. We're just starting to see the people who aren't so happy, and their voices are really having a hard time getting out there. But the detransitioners are starting to show us that this isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all cure-all for something that is very largely misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like this is very new phenomenon, and there's not a lot of it sounds like parents are looking for understanding, since this is so rapid and so on the rise so much. And so how do parents feel when they get this news, when their kid comes home and opens up and tells us to them? How do they feel, and how do they initially go about this, and how does OurDuty sort of guide these parents on what to do or how to navigate this?
Well, I mean, look, honestly, it's parents going down the road before us that have made the mistakes that we can now say it's not a great idea when your kid comes home and says, I might be born in the wrong body. Obviously, you have to accept that they're in some sort of distress. And that, I think, is the most important piece, is you have to let them know that you love them and that you support them no matter what. However, disagreeing with their assessment of being born in the wrong body, maybe don't lead with that, but I think in the back of your mind, you can know that that's a physical impossibility, and that it's a manifestation of a feeling they might have that deserves a lot of exploration. And I think, unfortunately, the current model, which is the affirmative model, would say, take your kid to a gender clinic and they will assess them. And in California and other states, you can get a hormone or a puberty blocker or a surgery letter for a minor in an hour after going to a specific kind of therapist, which to me is not an appropriate level of exploration. So what we try to do is prevent people from making those mistakes. So I would say, if your child comes to you and says that I'm not born in the right body, do not take them to a gender clinic. Come to our site at ourduty.group/USA. There's GenSpec, there's Partners for Ethical Care. There are lots of groups that can offer you support. And we're not denying their distress. We're just not quite sure that the evidence base is there to justify these medical interventions that are being offered to children.
Right. So it sounds like, proceed with caution, evidence-based. And when parents, get the news and they're sort of confused or in this, state of confusion, what are the parents' main concerns when dealing with this? Like, what are they most afraid of?
Well, I mean, I think the fear is that your child is going to be encouraged to socially transition, which happens a lot behind parents' back, and that seems like a benign, relatively harmless thing, but it's not. It's been actually proven by the Cass Review in England to be a profound psychosocial intervention. If you have all the teachers at school and all of your kids' friends and their parents calling your child a different sex and a different name, that can be very profoundly impacting. And, the AAP had a study that showed that 5 years into a child's new identity, it's 94% sustain. Well, of course they do. If everyone in their life is referring to them as something they're not, I think especially for younger kids, most of whom will outgrow this if left alone. It's a very intense psychological experiment that we're perpetuating on children. And some of the biggest proponents of this, the ACLU, describes this as the first part of a larger medical protocol. So you basically ostensibly have well-intentioned people outside of your family, and sometimes in your family, affecting your child in really profound ways. And it's very difficult to control that. And so I think if you have the information ahead of time, at least you have something to present to a counselor at school and say, we're not quite sure about this. It's not because we're transphobic. It's because we don't understand the origins of this. There's other comorbidities that aren't addressed. There's other things going on, and you need to make sure you find a therapist that understands the issue. And the goal is not to untrans your kid. The goal is not to change their mind. The goal is to get the best outcome for them. And we believe that radical self-acceptance is the best outcome for children who have gender distress. And that takes time and growth. And so I don't think pumping a kid's body full of puberty blockers and hormones is going to help them solve those issues.
Right. So it sounds like from the social transition, which is more psychological, and their environment, and it can include wearing binders and getting supplies and all that. That's more of psychological. But then they go into what it sounds like parents are most concerned with the medical piece of this, and sort of the hormones and surgeries, and going down that funnel. Have you seen parents describe any warning signs before being blindsided by this?
It's funny. I think there's a lot of guilt for parents, and so I'm not sure that many parents can really specifically pinpoint it, but I think any major behavior changes, I think self-harm is a big one. I think it's behavior changes. It's they drop clunky hints. They start talking about things they never really talked about before, enamored of the LGBTQ plus community. And again, this is not about being anti anything. It's just like it's a kind of really cool club to join for a lot of kids. And I've noticed, at least, in my peer group, very few children identify as heterosexual anymore. And that's an experimental phase they may or may not be going through. But I think there's a lot of pressure to sort of be cool. And this gives people an outlet for that. And so it's complicated. It's very complicated.
Right. It sounds like this sort of coping mechanism that's being made to be cool with these vulnerable young kids, and that's sort of what they're opting to when they're in their friend group or whatnot. And so for the parents that are not aware how big this thing is, because a lot of parents that I've seen, they're not really. Maybe they come in or whatnot, but they're not really aware how big this has gotten. And OurDuty is international. So can you describe what have you seen as far as the United States to how other countries are dealing with this?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the data that we have comes out of Europe. So the first real sort of slap in the face data was the 4,000% increase of referrals to Tavistock, which is the now disgraced gender clinic in England that's going to be reopening as satellite clinics with a holistic approach. I don't know how they're really going to handle the mess that they made. I know there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, but I think they were the first one. There was a lawsuit there, and then gradually we had Sweden, we had Finland, we had Norway, we had France, we have Belgium, we have all these countries. Denmark is next, and these are some of the communities and cultures that pioneered this work. These are socially liberal countries that are now saying there is no evidence base to continue this on 18 and under. Now, I would venture to say 25 and under because your brain's not fully formed. But my feeling is the United States, in all of its American exceptionalism, is doubling down and insisting that we know better than they do, even though we all have access to the same evidence. And so finally, after years of pressure, the American Academy of Pediatrics has agreed to do a systematic review. Now, whether that will bear out the same way that all the other systematic reviews have been done, looking at all the same evidence, which have all decided that that is very low quality and flimsy at best and experimental and all the words that we've been using, we'll see what they say. It will be interesting to see how they justify it if they come to some conclusion that this is evidence-based.
So why do you think that is that Europe is sort of taking this different approach from America? Is it the litigation factor? Is it the maybe there are special interests involved. Why is it so different from
I think
Europe versus the U.S.?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but I can guess that it's about money. I think we are unfortunately, and I suppose the world is just as subject to this as well. But the big pharma influence in this country is enormous. The medical industrial complex, without sounding too conspiratorial, it's a real thing, and we've seen the opioid crisis. We've seen how that played out. No one's really been punished. I think that the Sackler family has had to give some money back, but there hasn't really been restitution to those people. And I think that this is probably the next version of that. And a lot of it is because what happened then was doctors were told that this is not addictive. Go ahead, prescribe away. And it turns out that they were lied to. And so I think you have doctors that are being told the affirmative model works. This is the way. And so who are they to question it? If they're being told by all of the respected associations in this country, Endocrine Society, American Medical Association, but there's no evidence to back that up, and so they are unwilling to have those public conversations.
So it sounds like in this sort of case, it's more ideologically driven. This affirming model, it's just saying affirm, 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 and so have you seen parents have side effects or in dealing with this, whether it be if they don't go with the ideology. Maybe they're losing friends or they're being name called or whatnot. How have parents sort of dealt with that to have the best outcome for their kid?
Well, I mean, I think you walk a fine line because, again, I will emphasize, I am not disputing the distress of the child. I am disputing the treatment option being given to them. And so I would say if you can show me it's evidence-based, then fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that. As parents, most of us have taken our children to the dentist and the doctor, and we've gotten them vaccinated, however your feelings are about vaccines. We've all sort of done what we need to do to keep our children healthy as a whole. And a lot of us are not conservatives, which I know it shouldn't be about politics, but that's a quick, easy way to dismiss these conversations is, oh, well, you're a conservative. Well, I'm not. I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-gay marriage. I do not believe that that non-evidence-based medicine should be given to children. It's an experiment, and it's not even a very good one because they're not keeping track. They're not following up. There's nothing controlled about this experiment. It's a massive live experiment on this entire generation.
Yeah, especially from the the data. We're just coming in and getting these new studies, and so from all this going on, have you seen any whether it be success stories or parents that have successfully navigated through this, whichever way it may be?
Yes, we are having people who write back to us. Look, you call us, we'll speak with you, we'll give you resources, we'll do the best we can to set you up with someone who might be able to help you in a therapy session. But, a lot of this has to be you figuring out what's best for your own kid and how to reach your own kid. And a lot of this is about making sure you don't alienate them and that you make them understand that this isn't about what you think. This is about what you know and what they don't know, what the world at large does not know, which is that this is built on sand. The entities that are promoting this have terrible peer review scores. So the credibility of the people that are espousing this, it keeps just getting lower and lower. And so what's happening is the more that they put out studies, the smarter, more people are coming out of the woodwork to refute those studies. And so this is kind of a battle of the studies right now. It's a back and forth. And I do think that this will be settled by lawsuits. But in the interim, I think you have to pick your battles. You're not going to convince everyone that you're right, because it's not really about being right. It's about the best outcome for your child and their health. And so I would just advise, not making this something that you eat, breathe, and sleep every day, as much as that's very difficult, because it's really debilitating. You have to take breaks, and you need to find people. Come to find a support group.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my end, I've seen the power of a support group and getting these people together. Just to make them feel not alone, because I think this journey can be very, lonely, and when you have people that don't understand or maybe ideologically driven, the power of connection and community is a very good asset to have. And so how was OurDuty, from a legal perspective, what's going on there from the legal front, as far as maybe opposing bills or making sure that these medical organizations or what have you are going by an evidence-based approach from the legal side.
Well, I mean, I can tell you if you're an attorney and you're out there and you can help, please reach out to us, because Aaron Friday is a one-woman show at this point with definitely some help, but we need more. We need more people going to Sacramento. We need more people testifying. We need people analyzing these bills. It's insane the kinds of rhetoric that's being talked about in those hearing rooms. They have, there's bills to silence parents that want to question a teacher's, like, it's gotten to the point where it's abject censorship, and it's all dressed up in the guise of what's best for the kids, but it's really not. I think what those bills are not saying out loud is that they're wedging between families and children, and that is literally like child psychology 101. Unless a parent has shown that they are abjectly dangerous or unsafe for that child, and not believing someone's identity crisis does not make you that parent, it's important to keep families together and work together on these kinds of things. And so what a lot of the school policies and the bills are trying to do is give children autonomy to make these decisions on their own. And that's disastrous in this regard, because they can't possibly understand the ramifications of what they're doing.
Yeah, it seems like the whole point of gender ideology, or at least how it was designed, is to sort of break apart that family unit. And so how important is it to maintain that relationship with the child, and what are some strategies you've seen that parents have been able to do that?
Well, the number one thing is you need to build rapport and trust with your child, no matter what. So if it means compromising on a name and pronoun, you don't have to call the kid the pronoun that they want. You can call them a pet name from when they were little. You don't have to, give in to the whole thing if you don't believe in it, because it's a belief system. But you also don't have to activate them. And I think what parents make a mistake of telling them it's not true, and telling them it's a lie, and telling them all the things they believe, but that doesn't help your kid understand it. They need time to work through it. And so I think if you can, again, acknowledge their distress, but help them understand that you're looking into this as much as they are, and what you're finding isn't telling you that this is either a solution or a long-term sustainable outcome for them, because it basically turns you into a medical patient for life, which is, we go back to the money. So, I think if you can just encourage your child to use non-permanent interventions that help them, and if that's calling your kid a different name as a pet name, as opposed to compromising or using a name you don't want to use, like you'll find ways around that you can both agree on. But I think they just have to know that you're not, you don't disagree with who they are. You just disagree with the solution that they've come up with to fix that feeling.
Right, and at least from what I've seen, I think Leora Sapir said this, is that the best available treatment, I may be wrong, but is watchful waiting, just to watch, see what happens, but also psychotherapy, and sort of take that evidence-based approach instead of this affirmative model.
Well, the affirmative model drives you towards a medical model. That's the problem, is the affirmative model is a direct route. It starts at the school or wherever you got the idea, and it's fostered and watered and sown in the schools and in your community. And then the next natural step is to go to a gender clinic. Even something like a binder is not a healthy thing. It's self-harm. I look at that as self-harm, and it is basically advocating for young women to harm their bodies to make themselves feel better. And that is not a healthy message. The message is self-acceptance. And so, yes, it's a societal problem. It's coming from the outside. But as parents, we have to explain to our children that, there's no wrong way to be a boy or a girl. And that's the part about this ideology that I find so regressive, is that it's very limiting. It tells boys that are feminine that they're really girls, instead of like, be a feminine boy or be a masculine girl. It's very homophobic as well, because a lot of same-sex attracted people get attracted to it because they are more gender nonconforming, and it's a trap. And there's a lot of people who feel that this is, eradicating lesbians and gay kids.
Yeah, and so it sounds like what the data is suggesting, up to this far, is to sort of take that watchful waiting approach and see, sort of build on that relationship, but keep watching and seeing what has happened, and from an observation, and then it's get psychotherapy for the kid.
Correct, and delay. You need to delay. I think nobody should be doing anything until they're 25. Because so much changes, and I think we forget that. We forget how much changes between the ages of 14 and 25. You're basically an entirely different person. Your body isn't, but your rational thought and the way you approach things and your experiences. I mean, a lot of these kids are having these treatments before they've had any sexual experiences. How can an 11-year-old or a 9-year-old consent to never, ever knowing what that's going to feel like? Because that's the outcome of going on blockers when you're young. And they know that, WPATH knows that. There's a very strange disconnect between letting a child grow up and this whole idea of authentic self. I mean, I think it's a process. And so I don't think anybody should be doing anything permanent until they're 25. That's my opinion. I know that's not as popular with a lot of people, but especially something that's going to affect you for the rest of your life.
Got it. And as we wrap up, what is the number one message you have to these ROGD parents who are struggling with this right now?
Please reach out. I know it's not easy. It's confidential. It's really important to find like-minded people. And if you're a therapist or an attorney or anybody who is concerned about this, and you can lend your resources to us to help us fight this, please do so. The tide is turning. We just need more people to be courageous and speak up. And you don't always have to use your name and your likeness. You can use your writing abilities or your research expertise or however you want to contribute. But please reach out to us because we need your help. And parents, please reach out and we can set you up with a support group and hopefully find you someone who can help your child in therapy that, again, it's not conversion therapy. It's not trying to talk them out of anything. It's literally trying to get them to accept themselves for who they are. It's radical self-acceptance.
And where can people find you?
We're at ourduty.group/USA, and you can register there. And then we'll set up a Zoom call, and we'll figure out what you need based on where you are and how we can help you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the time, Gigi.